So here we are, the War of 1812, section 9.4. So this part is going to be real short. It's just the beginning of the war and the actions and the area that I wanted you guys to read just at the start of 9.4. So let's talk about the essential questions basically here. It's, what are the important results of the War of 1812? A lot of people have heard of the war, but are unfamiliar with anything that was achieved in the war. Also, we have to look at the people who become famous because they're going to impact American history for the next 20 years or so. So the events of the War of 1812, even though the war itself is somewhat short, about 2.5 years, the impact of the people that were there and the things that occurred are still with us in some ways to this day. So what we should always do as a nation is before we go to war, you have to ask, what is the reason we are fighting? What are we fighting for? Why are we going to fight? And so when we talk about the War of 1812, of course, we'll get into the causes, but that's always an important question when people are talking about war. And then with kids, and students, they always want to know, who won, who lost, did we win? Well, basically, a lot of times in war, it's about territory that's gained. Was there any new acquisition that the country gained through the war? Some wars, that is true. In other wars, not so much. In this one, you also think, well, is there a political reason that you went to war? Was it achieved during the conflict? So those are things that we have to think on when we discuss the War of 1812. So as we go, we're going to review those causes of the War of 1812. Of course, the first one, hopefully you don't forget that it's Britain's interference, as we call it on the high seas, that idea of impressment. Remember the idea of taking hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans over a period of about a decade. The other one was Britain's incitement. That's a big word for encouraging the Indians in the West to basically rise up and stop American movement into those areas. Remember, we have Tecumseh and then his brother, the Prophet. So in this war, we're going to talk about the goals that the United States has at the beginning of this conflict. We felt that one main thing was, as a nation, we needed to stand up to Great Britain and stop their interference on the high seas. That was going to be challenging, but that's what one goal was, to stand up to the interference of this very large superpower and deal with those issues. But we were hoping to try and keep the conflict on the land and not the sea. And there's a simple reason for that, and that is basically Great Britain's army is great, but Great Britain's navy is even better. And then there were also those imperialists. So boys and girls, if you're always thinking, why doesn't the United States just take into Canada and Mexico and things like that? There were people back then that exactly wanted that, to basically make Canada part of the United States. But in your reading, hopefully you realize at the beginning of the war, even though there was a lot of enthusiasm for the war, it does not go very well for the Americans at the time. We are poorly prepared. We do not really like standing armies. Most of our generals are too old to take the field. It is not the type of weapons and idea that we have today with people being in a standing army. So we have few good leaders. The army that we have is small. It's untrained. It's really not anything to be feared. Also, at the beginning of the war, we really have unrealistic goals. The idea that Britain's navy is the best in the world, the idea of trying to keep the conflict to land, understanding that Great Britain is also at war with France at the same time. And we believe that even though we wanted to take portions of Canada, we realized that the wish was much easier than trying to actually accomplish it. And we're going to end right here with basically a discussion, and I want you to use your little note form to kind of write some of these things down of the actual early successes. So if you look up here in the early years of the war, 1812, 1813, there are some successes, but there are also some failures as well. So let's deal with the successes right now. So one of the first ones, amazingly, deals with the sea, and it deals with this ship known as the USS Constitution. The USS Constitution was basically kind of called out by various British ships of the line up and down the eastern seaboard once war was declared. And so the United States, the USS Constitution was based in Boston. And so they go out and they actually encounter this ship known as the HMS Guerriere. and earns a nickname because of what happens in the battle. So here is a painting of the conflict. You can sort of see this would be the British flag here. But what happens is the Americans are able to defeat and then sink the HMS Guerriere. Americans were very skilled gunners. The ship was a very fast-moving ship with a well-disciplined crew, and so they were able to defeat them. And so where the name Old Ironsides comes from is that during the battle, supposedly a cannonball fired from HMS Guerriere hit the side of the Constitution and then bounced into the water without piercing the side of the ship. And someone, one of the sailors says, her sides are made of iron. And the legend and the nickname was born. So you could write that down. Those were some important things there. And of course the key people would be the crew of the Constitution. So when we look at this ship, and then there's another battle that occurs the same 2 or 3 months later down off the coast of South America. It's right here where Constitution, right here it is, encounters another ship known as HMS Java, and is able to defeat and sink that ship as well. And so this ship right here has a crew of probably about between 350 and 400 men, so it's very cramped, very serious conditions, not very nice kind of fighting place, but the idea is it's a tight-knit crew, and they gain this notoriety that's so much that the British issue a warning to all of their ships that they should not encounter HMS or CSS USS Constitution without a superior numerical advantage, meaning it's 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 to do that. So one other one that also deals with actually the water, and this one's not on the Atlantic, but this one deals with the Americans defeating the British on Lake Erie. And so once again the British are in Canada and they're coming down through Lake Erie, and so the Americans there under this man, and his name was Oliver Hazard Perry. So here he is. Oliver Hazard Perry was the leader of the ships there. You can see he was quite young. He was also a ship architect, so not only did he command the ships on Lake Erie, he was also instrumental in building the ships. Since it was on Lake Erie, the actual squadron had to be built there because, of course, there was no way to get ships in there otherwise. So what happens is that this takes place in September of 1813, and it is an important battle that turns back the British and their invasion through the Lake Erie area. So during this battle, his actual flagship was damaged so badly that he had to transfer his colors. That's what basically is done in this painting here. This would be Oliver Hazard Perry and much of his crew and some of the people transferring it to a different ship. So if you're ever behind somebody that has a U.S. Pennsylvania license plate and you can't sort of see it and it says USS Niagara, that's actually Perry's flagship. So that's why it's connected with Pennsylvania. So this occurs in September of 1813 on the Great Lakes, most specifically Lake Erie. So there will end the first part, just of the beginning of the War of 1812.